This talk came from a very specific project that we're working on. So we could have lots of different talks that talk about what does it mean to understand a map. So I'm actually going to start by telling you a little bit about that project so that you understand why we are thinking about this, this question in the project. So although AI technologies have been in development for a long time, and cartographers in fact been experimenting with them for a long time, the recent commercialization of some of these technologies has provoked a lot of interest. And it's also put AI technologies in the hands of the general public in the way that didn't really happen previously. So some of you might have seen last year at the banquet, Anthony and I gave what we hoped was an amusing Pachacha talk about AI and maps. And we explored some of its current capabilities. I'm happy to report to you that this year, this is an image that I made a couple of days ago, your jobs are still safe. You know, if you look at this from a long distance away, it kind of looks like a map, right? But if you actually look at the details of it, the river is doing some very strange things. The labels are definitely indicating that, you know, this is not a map to be trusted. The good news is the person's fingers actually look like real fingers this year, unlike last year, where we had some rather creepy fingers going on. And anyway, all right, so so we've been working on this project where we've been trying to use AI technologies and a specific type of AI technology, a large language model, which is what ChatGPT is. That's the type of AI model that ChatGPT is. And we've been using it to try and generate accessibility descriptions for maps, right? So this is a pretty simple and straightforward map, right? It shows one theme of data, and it really only has one layout element on it. It's got a legend, right? It doesn't have a title. It doesn't have many of the things that we would normally put on a map. And so let's look and see what is the current accessibility description for this map. So if you're serving a map on the web and it's some kind of image file, when you create the HTML to actually display that map, there's a thing called an alt tag, and that's typically where your accessibility information would go. If a person who has low vision or no vision is using a screen reader technology, the screen reader will read out loud to them what is in that alt tag. Right, so let's have a look at what the alt tag description is for this map. I've highlighted it here in yellow for you so you can see it well. Now, those of you at the back of the room maybe can't actually read that, so I'll just read it out loud. It says preview of E35, E39, D86033FF, blah, 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 blah. A lot of numbers, right? How useful is that to you? Oops, sorry. Does that tell you anything about that map? No. I mean, I guess it does have the word Europe in there, right? It is a map of Europe, so it's perhaps better than crickets, like nothing in there, which is actually, if there's a study that every year does a snapshot of the internet, and it looks at what alt text is in images generally. It's not about maps specifically. Maps, of course, are a subset of that. And still, in the most recent one, which came out in 2023, something like 55% of images have crickets in the alt text. So it's a big problem, right? Okay. All right. So I want to wake you up a little bit, so get out your phones, because you're going to have to do some work on the next slide. So get ready. All right, so scan that QR code, please. And I want you to have a look at this map. I'll keep it up on the screen. And I'd like you to try and describe it in one sentence. And coincidentally, this map comes from Food and Atlas. I had chosen this map well before I knew that Guerrilla Cartography was going to profile that one the other night. So this is one of the maps from that. So try and describe it in one sentence. And if you're in the back of the room, you're welcome to come close and look at it for a second. Is it letting you in? Oh, is the Wi-Fi is just spotty? Okay. I'll give you like another 30 seconds to type something. If you're anything like me, typing on the phone, I'm a disaster. All right, sorry, I gotta get my mouse to work because I gotta push a button. Why is my mouse gone?
We can see it on this.
You can see, okay, so I gotta move it. There we go. Oh. Well, let's see if I can make it go there. Why are the responses not coming up?
It's just,
Yeah, I'm tethered to my, I should be tethered to my, no, but I'm tethered to my,
The cellular is not great down here either.
all right. Does anybody want to shout out loud how they describe this? I planned for my internet. I didn't plan for your internet, unfortunately.
I wrote a CONUS map with circles showing farmers markets, cities or farmers markets.
Okay. Did you have your hand up? No, sorry, somebody else.
I don't know who you're pointing to, but farmers markets in cities rated, accessibility for farmers markets in cities rated.
Yep, and maybe one more.
I said map showing variability in access to farmers markets in several U.S. counties.
Okay, and one more. Somebody way in the back, just shout out.
I wrote a map of the contiguous United States in gray showing working symbols which represent farmers markets in major cities and accessibility to them.
Okay, so there's a pretty wide variety in the descriptions of these maps. There are some elements that I heard that were consistent. Farmers market was appearing. Accessibility was appearing. Whoops, sorry, now my mouse is somewhere else. There we go, now it's on my screen. My point here was to show you that even for a thematic map that is relatively focused in what it's trying to communicate, there's a range of descriptions. There was a range of levels of detail in those descriptions. Some of you described it in just a few simple words. Other people had a lengthier description. Okay, so I want to try this with one more map. Obviously, because we don't have the internet working, let's just try and shout these out instead. But this is a different type of map, and I'd like you to try and describe it in a sentence. Now, it's probably too small for you to read the labels. But use your knowledge of maps to guess what that might be showing.
Map of urban streets with business locations and names.
Okay, so a map of urban streets with businesses and names.
Downtown business locations in X.
Okay, so downtown business location, so you're identifying it as a downtown area. Yep. Justina.
A digital map of a downtown city area showing building footprints, roadways, parks, and labels.
Okay, so a little bit more description there, right? Whoops, we'll skip over. Oh. Okay, fantastic. We actually have some of those descriptions since the internet finally decided to work. Anyway, so I think you can see that there is some variety here in my point in doing this exercise is that there's a range of ways that we can do this. I don't, if we had everyone in this room doing it, we would produce different descriptions, every one of us. And the level of detail that's in there, the level of what is included and what is not included will change. And I think if we then took these and then had you rate them all to try and decide which one is the best, right, we would also have differing opinions on which one is the best. And this task is relatively hard. Like, if anyone is prepared to write an accessibility description about a map, it's probably the people in this room, right? Because we spend a lot of time thinking about maps. But there's heaps of people who are developing things on the web and putting, they might not have made the map, but they've sourced the map from somewhere and they put it on the web, right? And they're supposed to write these accessibility descriptions by law here in the US. You're supposed to have them if you serve an image on the web. But it's relatively difficult. And so we actually believe that that's a big barrier to people doing this. It's not we don't think that people think, oh, we shouldn't do that, right? They just don't know how, and so they don't, right? But also what is needed to adequately describe a map might change depending on what information the person who's using the map is seeking, right? It might also change depending on the type of map, right? I showed you two quite different maps, and the types of things you were saying were quite different. It might also depend on what the person is trying to do with the map, among other things, right? So this got us to thinking a little bit more big picture about why is this so hard? And so we thought we needed to think a little bit more about what do we mean when we say that we're trying to understand a map, right? And that led us to the question of, well, what is a map, right? Okay, so we started by looking to the literature about like what does it mean to understand a map. And this book, which is written by John Kimmerling, but Aileen Buckley, who's at this conference, is also involved in writing this book. They describe, so it's a textbook about how to learn how to read maps, right? And they describe 3 levels of understanding. So the first is map reading, which is basically just decoding what the symbols are, right? Map interpretation, which is about understanding the spatial patterns that are in the map. And then map analysis, which is then using that map to think about a problem analytically. And that would often involve bringing in some other ancillary information or perhaps applying critical approaches to map reading, et cetera. So we thought, okay, well, let's test this out and let's see how well prompts that are designed to try and capture these different ways of understanding maps or levels of understanding maps, what does that produce in an accessibility description? So here's a baseline prompt that I gave it, which I just told ChatGPT, write a 1-sentence accessibility description for this image. And this is what it produced. So it produced a sentence that says, this image is a heat map of Europe displaying population density in persons per square kilometer, with darker shades indicating higher density and lighter shades representing lower density areas. That's actually not horrible, right? At least it identifies the topic of the map. It interpreted the symbols correctly. It's not exactly a heat map. Well, I mean, we can debate about what a heat map actually is. But anyway, it's not the worst description in the world. So it actually does a reasonably good job for this very simple map. If we give it a more complicated map, it does a less good job. All right, so let's see what happens if we try and actually prompt it with a little bit more specific prompt. So here I've entered in the prompt, write a 1-sentence accessibility description that discusses the pattern depicted in this image. So here it says this image is a population density, depicts a population density map of Europe. So now it's identifying the location where darker shades of orange represent the higher concentrations of people per square kilometer, showing that Western and Central Europe are more densely populated than Northern and Eastern regions. Okay, so is this a better or worse description? In some ways it's better, in my opinion. It's now, saying something more specific about the symbols, right? But what exactly is Western Europe? Like if I look at this map and I say, Spain, I would normally consider that part of Western Europe, and it doesn't have higher density, right? Yep. And its description about the eastern regions, I think, is also not exactly right. I mean, Northern Europe does have lower population density, but not all parts of Eastern Europe. What does it mean when it's saying Western Europe? Is that a cultural category? Is that a direction, right? We don't really know. All right, so let's look at map interpretation. So here the prompt I gave it was, write a one-sentence accessibility description that explains why the pattern depicted in this image exists. So here it says, the map of Europe shows population density with darker areas indicating higher density, particularly in Central and Western Europe, due to factors such as historical development, industrialization, and urbanization concentrated in these regions. So this description is still ambiguously identifying those regions, right, in terms of geography, but it does suggest some reasons why you might have elevated densities in those regions, and they're not crazy things to suggest.
But none of them are actually shown on that.
Yes, and that, if you would just let me finish, Mark, that was the next thing I was going to say. Thank you very much. All right, so ChatGPT 4, prompt for map analysis. So here I said, tell me what other information could be paired with this image to explain why the patterns, why it has the patterns that it shows. And it gives actually a very lengthy description here. This is the first part of it. It kind of repeats many of the things that you could see in previously. And then it lists a whole big set of factors and details about those factors, which I did not put on this slide. It's like a whole page long description. And then it says, by pairing this map with contextual information, it would provide a more comprehensive understanding of blah, 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 right? So you can actually get it to tell you some things that could potentially be helpful. So that got us to thinking about, well, what is a map, right? You know, is it a designed artifact that's trying to communicate a very specific message? And that's what the map communication model approach would tell us it is. Or is it a storehouse of geographical information ready to be explored and mined for knowledge? That's what the geovisualization or map semantics approaches would tell us a map is. Or is it a collection of propositions about the world that enable some action to be taken? And that's what critical approaches might tell us a map is. So we were thinking about, well, could ChatGPT support these kinds of ways of understanding maps? And so LLMs, large language models, these are kind of our conclusions. Could it help us understand the message that the cartographer was trying to communicate? Maybe. I think it would have some success in doing that, right? Can it help us describe what knowledge could be mined from the map? Probably. It seems to actually be able to say some sensible things there. And could it identify arguments or propositions that the map is making? Perhaps for things that the map is showing, but probably not for things that the map isn't showing. And that's sometimes an important thing that we try and notice when we're applying a critical approach. So it would probably fail miserably at doing that. So what are some of our reflections here? Ultimately, we think in this project, in the long-term picture, what we'd like to work towards is actually a conversational map description system where the person would start by asking, you know, what does this map show? And then depending on what they wanted to get from the map, they would actually do a back and forth between the large language model, because the alt text is only ever going to describe a very small amount of the map, and they might want to know more than just the overview. But the alt text is very important at the moment because it helps them decide, is this a map I want to ask questions about, right? And so it needs to give enough information to decide, do I want to do that or not? And if the alt text it needs to be short, which level of understanding is most suitable? You know, we've applied this to one map, right? So we need to go and look at a whole bunch of maps and see what kind of alt text comes out with these different levels of understanding to see, you know, are there some things? I think just based on this sample alone, I would say that the first level of understanding would be perfectly fine, right? We don't need to go beyond that. But we'll test that with a bunch of different types of maps. And some conceptions of maps might be very hard to actually support with AI-generated map descriptions. So if you want to know more about our project, we do have one short published paper that goes into some of the empirical analysis we've done looking at other different types of maps. It's open access. You can just Google for it and get it. And I probably don't have any time for questions, but you can pin me down in the hall in coffee break. And thank you for submitting 38 descriptions. We're interested to see what you said.